What up? Yo, just Sean here, your host. Hope you're all well. Just a little heads up, warning up front that this episode has some sirens and shit in it. And I've had this happen to me before when I've been driving, just listening to a podcast, and suddenly fucking police fucking sirens, woo woo woo, coming up behind you, and you're like, whoa, what the fuck, where's that, where is it coming from? Because like, the audio effects are just so good, you know, I've got that like panned sound, you know, that Doppler shift, fucking. So, you know, also be aware of your surroundings, that maybe there is an ambulance or a fire truck or a police officer pulling you over, but also be aware that it might just be sound effects taking place in this podcast. So yeah, that's that. Alright, hope you're all well. Shout outs and shit in the breakdown coming out next few days. If you haven't, just while I'm here quickly, be hell sick if you want to go chuck us a review. I'm not going to tell you to make it 5 stars, but that'd be pretty cash money of you. Just go sling us a review, you know, on iTunes or Facebook or fucking whatever. Helps people find the show and helps us grow and gives us all the warm and fuzzies inside to know that we're doing shit that you like. So that's why we keep doing it. Alright, I'm off to bed. Ta-ta. Night, y'all. Love you. Bye. Bye. Bye.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
You're listening to Carousel Sniper Victim, a Dead Glass Design production, with your host, Sean Jeffrey.
It is a race against time, an intense rescue effort underway in Somerset County to get to 9 miners trapped more than 200 feet below ground.
They got trapped about 1.5 miles into a shaft in the Quecreek Mine.
Details are sketchy, but rescue crews are headed to the mine right now, and we've been told there's some kind of collapse, possibly flooding inside that mine.
They couldn't walk out the front. We knew that. The only other way they could come out is if you drove a shaft down to them.
But we also knew that we couldn't punch that hole through until we had the water down to a certain elevation.
When the bit broke, we were really in agony at that point.
The top person's job, in this case the governor's job, is to ask the tough questions, to press.
Every day, all around the world, people go to work. Oftentimes a large part of who we are is shaped by the jobs we do. At work we build networks of friends and strengthen social bonds, all whilst collectively growing a stronger society. Whether it's the fisherman that harvests the sea or the coal miner that excavates the earth, life and livelihood are largely dependent on the kindness of nature. Entire communities can often be affected when disasters strike, and this can be especially true for mining communities. Mining is a dangerous business. Sometimes in our insatiable hunger for resources, we dig too deep. We tunnel too far. We push the limits of luck rather than rely on the merits of safety. The early 20th century was an especially dangerous time to be working the shovels. March 10th, 1906, over 1,000 people, including children, are killed in the worst mining disaster to date in Europe. The next year, 1907, December 6th, 362 people die in a mining accident in the US. 1913, 439 mine workers are killed in one accident in the UK. 1942, over 1,500 miners are killed in one accident in Banksy, China. Even nowadays, in the safely modernised industrial world of the 21st century, miners can still find themselves in some fucking terrifying situations. In July of 2002, at the Quecreek Mine in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, a series of miscalculations and bad luck would leave 18 miners struggling to survive. Trapped in a sticky quagmire of mud, coal, and desperation, it would take every bit of luck and every bit of manpower they could muster for them to get out alive.
Breaking news in America's coal mining country. We now know
the coal mine that exploded Monday has a history of safety violations.
Blistering report out tonight on the West Virginia coal mine. Report out tonight on the West Virginia coal mine.
Somerset County is on the eastern edge of the Appalachian Coal Basin in the United States of America. Coal has been mined in this area for at least 150 years. However, when the American steel economy collapsed, so did the major market for much of the coal that came from Pennsylvania. By the time the coal operators got their shit together enough to enter into a new market, generating electricity, the bedrock of the entire coal industry had changed dramatically. New technologies and mining techniques had made coal mining a far less labour-intensive undertaking than it had used to be, 100 years ago. As the coal miners' place in the local economy and social order began to dwindle, the bond between miners was strengthened. According to most sources that I could find, the people that make up the dwindling number of actual coal miners in the US today are in their middle age, or approaching it, and many have 2 or more decades in the mines. It seems mining becomes more than just a job. When you spend hours underground battling the elements, your workmates become more like your comrades in arms. And this mentality can be an absolute lifesaver when shit hits the fan. Quecreek Mine was built in the year 2000. It stretches over 2.5 kilometres into the hillsides of Somerset County. Quecreek is just one of 9 coal mines in the Somerset County area alone. And that's not to mention all of the old abandoned coal mines scattered around the area. The closest of which to Quecreek is Saxman Mine, having been abandoned for over 40 years. Saxman Mine now produces 0 coal. Instead, it holds over 500 million tonnes of stagnant water that has built up in the 40 years since its abandonment. Quecreek Mine, like a lot of mines in the area, is what is known as a room and pillar mine, meaning the mined material, in this case coal, is extracted across a horizontal plane, not going, super far down, more across. This creates arrays of rooms and pillars. To do this, rooms are dug out whilst pillars of untouched material are left to support the massive weight of earth overhead. 900 metres into Quecreek Mine itself, the mine splits into 2 separate mine shafts. It's all right-angled turns and It looks like something out of a demented Doom level when you look at the schematics. Lots of dark corridors going off into forever. And in some areas, the roof is no more than 1.5 metres high. That is Quecreek Mine. It was 3 p.m. on the 24th of July, 2002, when 18 workers arrived for the night shift at Quecreek Mine. And like any other day, they split into 2 teams of 9 men. One team was led by veteran coal miner Ron Shad, and the other team, led by an equally experienced miner, Mark Popanak. The 2 teams descended into the Quecreek Mine. It would be a 40-minute journey to the shafts where the active coal mining was taking place, and this journey would be undertaken in 2 electric vehicles known as man trips. At the 900-metre mark, the 2 teams split at the junction. Shad drove his team straight towards an area known as the Mains, whilst Popanak took his team left at the junction towards an area known as First Left. The 2 teams were now over 500 metres away from each other in the mine, and as soon as they got to their respective coal faces, they got to work. The 9 coal mines located in Somerset County alone churn out over 2 million tonnes of coal per year, but it doesn't come for nothing. Since 1970, on average, 180 miners are killed every year in the US, with cave-ins being the biggest killer. But as one coal miner states, you put that to the back of your mind, and you get on with work. Work today for Mark Popanak's team at First Left involved using a 60-tonne beast of a machine with 100 hardened carbon steel teeth to chew out 20 tonnes of coal per minute. Now, as I said earlier, there are old abandoned mines scattered all over the area, Saxman Mine being the closest to Quecreek. Now, according to the plans that Mark Popanak's team were working from, they had 91 metres of coal at least between them and the edge of the old Saxman Mine. But, as plans often go, they were wrong. There was actually only a few flimsy metres of earth and coal between them and the 500 million tonnes of stagnant water, now filling the enormous void of the Saxman Mine. Mark Popanak and his team had been hard at work for about 6 hours. It was just approaching 9 p.m. 20 metres ahead of Popanak, the enormous mining machine was chewing away at the earth. Only 2 hours to go till quitting time. Suddenly, there was no machine. There was no earthen wall of coal and mud. There was just a wall of water. The first left shaft of the Quecreek Mine had just ruptured the poorly charted final sections of the abandoned Saxman Mine, and in doing so, had just unleashed almost 250 million litres of stagnant water. Enough water to completely fill the Quecreek Mine from floor to ceiling. As soon as the wall of water came bursting through the mine shaft, Mark Popanak dove into the only safe space that he could see. A small recess in the wall next to him, barely bigger than a portable toilet. Essentially just a little nook in the wall that saved him from the full force of the water as it came smashing through the tunnel, completely knocking aside the 60-ton mining machine in the process. The rest of Popinak's team managed to dive into the adjoining tunnel on the opposite side of the now raging water. Although cut off from each other and in a seriously fucked up situation, they were by no means the worst off. 500 metres away, working in the section known as the Mains, was Ron Shadd and his team. This section of the mine is located at a lower point than where Mark Popinak and his team at first left were located. And as water tends to do when under the influence of gravity, it flowed downhill. Ron Shadd and his team had no idea that over 500 million tonnes of water was now flowing downhill straight towards them. Back at first left, one of the coal miners had managed to make his way to an emergency phone and call not only to the surface, but he also managed to get through to Ron Shadd over at the Mains via another emergency phone located there. He passed on the alert that they had struck water and to immediately evacuate the mine. Ron Shadd knew the only way that he and his team would be able to get out was if they could beat the water back to the main junction with the mine shaft. If the water got there first, they'd be trapped. Shadd jumped onto a nearby golf buggy and immediately began to notify his team of the situation. 7 of the 9-man team piled back into the man trip and slowly began to crawl back up to the surface, whilst Shadd took off ahead to locate the last member of the team, who was back up closer to the junction. There was no water anywhere to speak of so far, and some of the men had even joked about a possible early knockoff. Up ahead of the slow-moving man trip, Ron Shadd located the last member of his 9-man team, and they raced on towards the junction. At the location where the mine shaft splits, it actually dips to a lower point than the mains area where Ron Shadd and his team were racing back from. And so as Ron Shadd and his colleague in their buggy neared the junction, they came face to face with their worst nightmare. The mine shaft up ahead, their only way up and out to the mine entrance, was filled floor to ceiling with water. Water that was now slowly rising up the mine shaft towards them. They were now cut off from the surface and the mine was filling with 250 million litres of water. Luckily for his workmates, Ron Shadd was a seasoned miner, and he remembered another possible solution. Running the entire length of the mine shaft on one side was a concrete reinforced ventilation shaft. There was every chance, if they found an access point, they could crawl the entire length of the shaft up and out to the mine entrance. And so they didn't fuck about. Shadd immediately reversed his golf buggy up to the nearest ventilation access point, and in a moment of quick thinking, he left the vehicle's headlights on and pointed straight at the ventilation shaft entrance, so that his remaining workmates would know exactly where to go. A few minutes later, the rest of Shadd's team arrived at the same problem that he had, when they reached the flooded junction as well. As they began to reverse back up the shaft, they saw Shadd's headlights from his golf buggy pointing their way to their salvation. They entered the ventilation shaft a few minutes behind Shadd, sealing the shaft behind them from the rising water. However, Shadd's team of miners had only crawled a few hundred feet when they heard the sound of the first ventilation shaft door give way to the enormous amount of pressure behind it. Water was now pouring into the ventilation shaft behind them, and their escape route was about to become a deadly washing machine. It took them over 40 minutes to battle the rising water in the ventilation shaft, but at approximately 9:45 p.m, almost an hour after water had first breached the Quecreek Mine, Rod Shadd exited the mine first with his colleague, followed a few minutes later by his 7 other crew members. 9 men from Rod Shadd's team had entered, and 9 men had come out. Job well done. The celebrations, however, were short-lived. It was around this time that Ron Shadd and his team realised that no one from Mark Poppenak's crew had been seen at the surface yet. It was Poppenak's team that had breached into the Saxman Mine over at the area of First Left, and they had called the evacuation up to the surface and notified Shadd's team. But no one had heard anything from them since. And the area of First Left didn't have a ventilation shaft to crawl into like Shadd's team had. If they weren't out now, they were trapped. Over 900 metres into the mine, still at First Left.
My heart was pumping a mile a minute. I didn't stop too long because I didn't know how fast the water was coming. I figured if I pass out or have a heart attack, it's better to drown than... I knew then that, I made it. I was out. And I was so worried that, my buddies didn't make it. So I'm looking. Finally, I saw some lights coming, and I had no idea how many. You can see glitters coming. It's a real good feeling, to know that they made it out also. All of us really wondered where the other crew was. That was what we was thinking of then. Where's the rest of the guys?
Mark Poppenak and his crew were in a real shitstorm. Poppenak was still cut off from the 8 other members of his team by a raging torrent of water. And even though the water was flowing downhill away from them, it was now starting to backfill up into this section of the mine. Poppenak told his crew to forget about him and to try and save themselves. And twice they did try. One attempt, they tried to travel in the 4-foot-high tunnels over 3,000 feet, or 910 metres, to a shaft that would lead them up to the surface as well, but these were also flooded. They attempted then to crawl along the elevated conveyor belt too, but this also failed as the torrent of water eventually overcame them. A third time they came back and were determined to get Poppenak out of his situation. The 8 team members located a huge piece of earth-moving equipment with a front-end bucket attachment. They managed to manoeuvre the vehicle into the fast-flowing water so that the bucket was only a few feet from Poppenak. He didn't think twice. Poppenak launched himself across the torrent of water and into the bucket of the earth-moving equipment. The 9 members of Poppenak's team were now at full strength again. Now all they needed was a way out. Back on the surface, Pennsylvania State Police were guarding the Quecreek Mine site by 10:30 p.m. and instructed reporters to go to the local church for a press conference scheduled to occur later that night. State Police Corporal Robert Barnes Jr. also telephoned families of missing miners, asking them to come to the Sipesville firehouse for more information. Around 11 p.m, Corporal Barnes also asked United Methodist pastor Barry Rittenell if he could spend the night at the firehouse with the families. It was around this time that calls were made between 11:30 p.m. and 12 a.m. to try and locate a drill that could bore a hole big enough to raise men from a mine. A drill big enough was located in Clarksburg, West Virginia, about 2.5 hours and 220 kilometers away. It was calculated that the miners had approximately 1 hour before the mine completely filled with water. With the mine portal entrances to Quecreek nearly underwater by 1 a.m, rescue operations started immediately. Pumps were brought in from everywhere and anywhere. They were brought in from all over the state of Pennsylvania, and they began pumping water as soon as possible. The rescuers had to try and buy the miners as much time as possible by slowing the rising water any way they could. While pumping water would begin at all mine locations and any nearby residential and commercial water wells, the mine rescue first focused on getting air to the trapped miners, as it was assumed that the air quality would be dropping rapidly inside the now cut-off air pocket inside First Left. With the help of Bob Long, an engineer technician for civil mining environmental engineering, GPS measurements were made, and they had to be fucking crazily accurate, and a 6.5 inch or 170mm diameter borehole was commenced at 2:05 a.m. The borehole was drilled to allow air to be pumped into the mine shaft where the miners were assumed to be, at the most uphill location near where the Saxman mine had been breached. We have to keep in mind that the rescuers had no communication with the miners since the breach was reported. This was all being calculated on a sort of, what would we be doing if it was us? We'd try to go to higher ground. So that's where they decided to drill to try and locate Mark Popanak and his crew. A 4-member team started working at about 3:15 a.m. on Thursday, and its drill cracked through what turned out to be 240 feet, 73 meters of rock, and into the mine shaft 1 hour and 45 minutes later, at about 5:06 a.m, approximately 8 hours after the initial breakthrough. The drilling rig's air compressor pushed air into the mine, and the air returns from the borehole showed a marginal air quality of 19.3% oxygen, which is manageable. Rescue workers tapped on the inserted air pipe, and at 5:12 a.m, they received 3 strong bangs in response, followed by 9 taps at 11:40 a.m. However, while the drill rig's compressed air rapidly increased the oxygen content of the mine air, monitors showed that the rising water was at about 556 meters above sea level. Rescuers feared that they had little more than maybe an hour before the area where the miners had taken refuge would be completely underwater. Mine ventilation expert John Urasek of the US Mine Safety and Health Administration proposed a pretty out-of-the-box idea. He proposed to create a pressurized air pocket for the miners. Urasek's plan had never been tested in the United States, but despite some skepticism, calculations were made by some very fucking smart people, and the hole was sealed around the air supply where the drill was reaching down into the mine. The drill operator then used his rig's air compressor to pump and maintain 920 cubic feet per minute at a temperature of 92 degrees Celsius at 90 pounds per square inch of pressure. The sound due to the high rate of pumped air deafened and hurt the miners' ears, but it provided hope by the knowledge that the rescuers at least knew that they were there. They were now attempting to keep the water at bay by sealing them in a pressurised air pocket. Think of, if you put a cup upside down and try and push it into water, it gets hard because it's got air pressure built up inside. That's what they're going to try and do to stop the water rising up the mine. It's going to hit this big bubble of air and hopefully keep the miners safe inside. Meanwhile, an ongoing battle was waging to dewater the Quecreek Mine to allow rescue operations to be planned. Millions of gallons of water had to be pumped from the flooded coal mines as the water level needed to be lowered to prevent the loss of the air pocket in the mine area where the 9 miners would congregate. Imagine this scenario. Should a rescue hole penetrate the mine whilst the miners are in that air pocket still under pressure, holding the water back, the air pocket would collapse and the void would just go poof and be flooded with water and the miners would drown. Work proceeded immediately to install pumps in the pit as they arrived. At 8:33 a.m. Thursday, the first of several diesel pumps arrived at the mine site. Before this pump arrived, only 2 submersible pumps were operating. But at 11:05 a.m, water was still 4 to 5 feet deep in the mine pit entrance. High-capacity diesel pumps were installed in the pit and put into operation in the afternoon. A 6-inch, 150mm drop in the water level was reported between 4 and 6 p.m. that evening. It seemed the water was now actually going down. The pumping discharge rate fluctuated constantly though as new pumps arrived and changes were made. The maximum pumping rate achieved was approximately 27,000 gallons per minute, or 102,000 litres of water being pumped out of the mine every minute. Back underground, rising water covered the initial air shaft, preventing the miners from tapping on the pipe, though for a time they used a hammer to bang on the rock ceiling, detectable by seismic equipment which was brought in by federal mining officials. By noon, Thursday, the miners had to retreat to the highest point they could, about 300 feet or 91 metres from the initial air shaft. They were now at a location known as Entry Number 1. With water rising just 21 metres 70 feet away, miner Randy Fogel estimated that they still only had about an hour to live. Notes were written, prayers were said, and most of the miners roped themselves together. They knew that when the water rose and finally claimed them, that their bodies could float away and be lost in the maze of flooded mine shafts. If they were going to die, they wanted to die and hopefully have their bodies be found as a family.
And I remember Blaine asking Randy for a pen, but he wanted to write a note to his family. And he tore off a piece of cardboard from a resin box. We took turns with the pen and we put them in a bucket and sealed that bucket up.
The dewatering continued. The miners eventually noticed and they confirmed that the water, it appeared at least, to have stopped rising. Switching instead to survival mode, the drenched miners sought to conserve resources and sat back to fight hypothermia. Their environment had an ambient temperature of about 10 degrees Celsius, 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Crew Chief Fogel in particular encouraged them all, confident of rescue. Another coal miner, Dennis Hall, found a lunch pail and discovered that the still dry corned beef sandwich his wife had made was inside and a bottle of Pepsi. whilst another miner, Thomas Foy, found 2 Mountain Dews in another one of the mining machines. The miners at this point could hear the drill getting nearer and nearer. Their salvation was grinding its way through the earth over their heads, and oh how sweet it sounded. But at 1:50 AM, Friday, the drilling stopped. Back on the surface, and a day earlier, a super drill capable of drilling a 30-inch, 760mm hole had been sent via police escort up from West Virginia. Once the oxygen purging began, drillers had begun the 30-inch rescue hole number 1 at 6:45 PM, Thursday, July 25th. This big giant borehole was planned to intersect the first left section where Mark Popanek and his team were. They situated this drill approximately 20 feet or 6.1 meters-ish away from the ventilation hole that they had first drilled, and they were making good progress. They drilled to a depth of 105 feet or 32 meters by about 1:15 AM on Friday, when the drill bit broke. That is why the miners had heard the drilling stop. The distance from this point where the drill had broken to the mine where they needed to reach was estimated at 139 feet, 42 meters away. At 3:45 AM, a portion of the bit was retrieved from the hole, but it was discovered that a worst-case scenario had started to unfold. Part of the drill bit had broken off and was now stuck in the hole. This would require a special tool to be fabricated in order to assist in retrieving the bit. Normally, such a job would be done in 3 or 4 days, time the miners just didn't have. But a 95-member machine shop in Big Run, Jefferson County, was able to come together and build the tool in approximately 3 hours. And a National Guard helicopter flew the tool in, and the bit was retrieved from the rescue hole number 1 at 4:09 PM on July 26. The failure of this drilling equipment stopped progress at the rescue hole for about 18 hours. The miners, understandably would have been fucking shitting themselves. Crew Chief Fogel opinioned that they might have just plugged up the hole or might have broken a bit and, they were moving over, and he reassured the others that drilling would surely begin again soon. The miners' relatives were taken to the mine on the afternoon of the 25th and briefed on the rescue effort so far. The Governor of Pennsylvania, Mark Schweiker, visited the site that night and said that, quote, "We are bringing every asset that is necessary to complete this rescue operation, and anything less than the rescue of all 9 of the men will be unacceptable." End quote. At 7 PM, Friday, a new 30-inch, 760mm drill bit arrived from West Virginia. But due to its slightly larger size, the hole had to be enlarged from the surface. This operation started at approximately 8:40 PM on Friday. And then, drilling was stopped again, as the operation damaged the outer cutting bits and a new bit assembly was needed. At 6:30 AM, the installation of the new 26-inch bit was completed and drilling resumed. One possibility that was feared at this point was that if they broke into the chamber too quickly, it could result in the water in the mine rushing upward and drowning the miners. An additional possibility, though, as well, was that of the miners being afflicted with decompression sickness, due to their breathing air which was at a higher pressure than the surface pressure. In preparation for these possibilities, an airlock was fashioned to go on top of the escape shaft, and on Thursday evening, 10 portable hyperbaric chambers arrived at the drilling site. Drilling continued until 1:38 p.m. on July 27th, until it was stopped to install the airlock and wait for the water to be pumped down to an acceptably safe level. Drilling started again at 4:45 p.m, but about 4 hours later at around 8 o'clock, the rings in the airlock failed and had to be repaired. About an hour later, the repairs were completed on the number 1 drill airlock and drilling resumed. At 10 p.m, the water elevation was still dropping steadily, a good sign. Then, at 10:16 p.m, the number 1 drill cut through into the mine site at a depth of 239.6 feet, or 73 metres. After rescue hole number 1 broke through into the mine, rescuers signalled the trapped miners by tapping on the 6-inch drill bit with a steel hammer, and a faint response was heard. The miners had been taking turns every 15 minutes or so to walk 250 feet, 76 metres back down the passageway from their high ground where they were taking shelter, to check the area where they could hear the drilling was coming from. When 2 of the miners, Heilman and Foy, made the trek on Saturday at about 10:15 p.m, their lamps on their mine helmets were just running out of battery. But that was when they found the drill opening, and Heilman alerted the others. Immediately after the rescue hole penetrated the mine, all equipment was shut down in order to take an accurate relative air pressure reading between the mine and the surface atmospheres. The pressure reading was 0, indicating that the pressures were equal and that the airlock would not be required. The compressor was turned off and the drill steels were removed from the 6-inch hole. At 10:53 p.m, a special pen-shaped 2-way communication device was lowered into the 6-inch air pipe, with a child's glow stick attached to it for visibility down in the dark mine. Communication was then established. Possibly via one of the stupidest fucking questions ever. The lead rescuer asked over the 2-way radio, "Are you the 9 trapped miners? Who the fuck else do you think is in this exact spot 73 metres underground, mate?" "Yeah, we're the 9 trapped miners." The miners confirmed that all 9 of them were alive and well. The foreman, though, had been experiencing chest pains. At 12:30 a.m, on July 28th, the 8.5-foot high steel mesh escape capsule, filled with supplies, descended into rescue hole number 1, into the void where the men had languished in fear and hope for 77 hours. Due to recurring chest pains, foreman Randy Fogel was chosen to be the first rescued miner, and he arrived at the surface at approximately 1 a.m. The removal order of the rest of the crew was based upon their weight, the heaviest down to the lightest, as the last guy would have no assistance in getting into the capsule. He'd have to be able to do it himself. The miners were brought up in 15-minute intervals, and all 9 miners were on the surface at 2:45 a.m. None of the miners suffered from decompression sickness, and they were transferred either by helicopter, flying at low altitude, or by ambulance to hospitals. However, as the drill shaft had gone through an aquifer, in their final exits the miners had actually been drenched in yet another torrent of freezing cold water. Extremities were purple and mottled from the immersion and trauma. One surgeon, Dr. Russell Dumeyer, stated that, quote, "They were freezing cold. It looked like if you rubbed against their feet, you could just rub the skin right off." End quote. The coal miners' names, in the order of rescue, were Randy Fogle, Harry Blaine Mayhew Jr., Thomas Tucker Foy, John Unger, John Philippi, Ron Heilman, Dennis J. Hall, Robert Pugh Jr., and Mark Popanak. Randall Fogle was the most seriously affected of the 9 miners, and he was the one complaining of chest pains upon his rescue. All have since made full recoveries, but some are still in the industry. Fogle is the only member of the group who still works underground, whereas Dennis Hall retired from the industry and vowed never to go underground and mine again. An investigation was completed by the US Mine Safety and Health Administration. The primary cause of the water inundation was the use of an undated and uncertified mine map of the Saxman Mine that did not show the complete and final mine workings. Using this map led to an inaccurate depiction of the Saxman Mine workings on the Quecreek Mine map. Governor Mark Schweiker convened an investigation committee in the days after the rescue, paying particular attention to the actions of the Black Wolf Coal Company, the mine owners, which had been previously cited 25 times for violations. The report concluded, the rescue of the trapped miners was a major success. Fogle's decision and Hall's persistence to immediately notify the miners in the main section was life-saving because of the rapid inflow of water. Without that timely warning, they would not have been able to escape. Additionally, the first left section's crew's decisions to stay together, work as a team, and go to the highest ground were crucial for their own survival. The miners who escaped the inrush of water made similarly good decisions. Their knowledge of escape ways and escape procedures aided in their escape. The fast actions of company officials in calling for assistance of expert personnel and appropriate equipment, and the rapid response of those contacted played a major role in the success of this whole rescue. But sadly, 1 year later in 2003, rescuer Bob Long, whose knowledge and GPS measurements were crucial in laying the ventilation hole down to the miners and initially establishing communication, he committed suicide. A reminder that depression often follows the event among those involved and survivors in high-profile rescues. I think the reason that the rescue at Quecreek is such a great story was summed up by a local Pennsylvanian newspaper. Printed Sunday, August 4th, 2002. The Quecreek rescue is a drama that has captivated the world for 5 days, ending July 28th. It unfolded in beautiful Somerset County, which is not even 13 miles from the horrific end of September 11's Flight 93, where heroism had no witness and death was the only outcome. This time though, heroes were evident above and below the Earth's surface, and the outcome lifted a veil of darkness from the trapped miners and, at least for a while, from a world that seems perpetually trapped by bad news.
Go, boys, go. They'll time your every breath. And every day you're in this place, you're 2 days nearer death. But you go. Well, a process man am I, and I'm telling you no lie. I work and breathe among the fumes that trail across the sky. There's thunder all around me, and there's poison in the air. There's a lousy smell that smacks of hell and dust all in me hair. And it's go, boys, go. Help time your every breath. And every day you're in this place, you're 2 days nearer death. But you go. Well, I've worked among the spinners and I breathe the oily smoke. I've shoveled up the gypsum and at nigh made you choke. I've stood knee deep in cyanide, got sick with a caustic burn. Been working a rough life, seen enough to make your stomach turn. And it's go, boys, go. Help time your every breath. And every day you're in this place, you're 2 days nearer death. But you go. There's overtime and bonus opportunities galore. Hey, young men like their money and they all come back for more. But soon you're knocking on and you look older than you should. For every bob made on the job you paid with flesh and blood. And it's go, boys, go. Help time your every breath. And every day you're in this place, you're 2 days nearer death. But you go. Well, I process man am I, and I'm telling you no lie. I work and breathe among the fumes that trail across the sky. There's thunder all around me, and there's poison in the air. There's a lousy smell that smacks of hell and dust all in me hair. And it's go, boys, go. They'll time your every breath. And every day you're in this place, you're 2 days nearer death. And it's go, boys, go. They'll time your every breath. And every day you're in this place, you're 2 days nearer death. But you go.